everyone, Chris Patterson here. Next up in my series of book elements, and we're not talking about elements like plotting or characterization. We're talking about elements like, should I portray drugs, sex, language, violence, diversity, politics? I didn't even talk about that in my last video. Oh my gosh. Should you talk about politics? No, you never talk about religion or politics in mixed company. But maybe you should. I don't know. Okay, but today, the last video I talked about was sex, right? Got that one out of the way. That's pretty straightforward, I think. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But this next one is not as straightforward, and that is language. Should we swear? What constitutes a swear word? Oh my gosh, this is a loaded one. And this is one where I have probably gotten the most criticism out of any element of book. I have an off-page sex scene in my first book. Got a little bit of criticism from a couple kind of more fundamental Christian readers on that one. That was fine. I can deal with that. Had a couple people talk about the violence in my books, stuff like that. Had a couple people that didn't like the fact that I used the word gypsy because they thought it was a racial slur. I don't think it is. I'm not going to change it, so I apologize. But the one that I've gotten the most flack about is language, and it's kind of crazy. You would think, oh, he put a swear word in there. Well, no. There's been times where I've had people reach out to me, and they're like, there's no way that person would have just said that. They should have dropped several F-bombs in that case. You can't make everyone happy, okay? So the first thing you need to ask yourself when you're thinking about this, and this is the same thing I said when I talked about putting sex in your book, and that is, why is it in there? Why is language in there? Why is your character swearing or cussing or using, whatever, right? If it's just for awe factor, not a good reason. If you just want to drop the F-bomb because you want to intrigue people, I think you need to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to be honest. Okay. I just think that's a really bad reason to have anything in your book. Okay. I mean, I would say the same thing to a fantasy author that just put a dragon in there just because. Fire breathing dragon. Why? I don't know. Because dragons are cool. Not terrible reason. Terrible reason, guys. Okay. So why is language in there? Okay. So I think, again, we got to go through the same steps that we went through with sex. And that is, who are you writing to? Right? Again, middle grade or lower, I mean, you got to be really, really careful. Now, I get it. I got 3 kids, and they're exposed to all kinds of language. Not at home, but out in the real world, they're exposed to all kinds of language, movies, all that stuff, okay? Stuff I have no control over. But we need to be really, really careful when we're talking about middle grade or lower. Definitely should be, maybe a damn, maybe a hell in there, maybe. Okay, but you got to be careful, okay? Harry Potter's a great example. J.K. Rowling's really, really, really careful about her language. Some people, oh gosh, this drives me nuts. Some people tell me that the word bloody is a swear word in the UK. Of course, I've talked to my friends who live in the UK, and they're like, it's kind of like hell or damn, right? Okay, so that one I think you're okay. Young adult, okay. Again, as we move up in the age that we're targeting, obviously things get ramped up a little bit. If you're writing a young adult book, again, the first thing you need to ask is, why is it there? Does it advance the character? Does it describe the character? Does it explain who the character is? They got a potty mouth. They're always angry. Whatever the case may be, then I think you could justify putting some swearing in there. If it's young adult, I would highly encourage you from avoiding anything racial. And there's probably a couple exceptions there, okay? Writing about someone who is the brunt of racism, okay, that's a little different. But probably avoid racial epithets. And I would also avoid F-bombs, and I would avoid the 2 C words. And you can probably figure out what those are, okay? And that doesn't mean that everything else goes, but at the same time, like, again, we're writing to and writing about teenagers, young adults. Those are very much realities in their life. I mean, I think that you can be a little more free. Again, why, right? Why are you writing that? Okay. Awe factor, no good. And then, of course, after that, if it's an adult book, adults are reading it, you have to consider your audience. Okay. So again, if you're writing to a faith-based, spiritual, Christian audience, you have to understand that certain types of language are going to turn them off. Now, that's a very wide spectrum. And like I said, because my books fall under one umbrella of Christian fantasy, that's one thing that I've actually edited out. I had a couple F-bombs here and there. And, people are like, hey, I love your story, but, I don't know why they're in here. And I go, okay, it's cool. Like, they don't really need to be in there. It doesn't do anything for the story. Going back to my original, check, does it advance the story? And so I changed it. No big deal. No skin off my back. I didn't really care. But some Christian readers are okay with language. If it helps describe a person's character, a person's situation. The one thing that you need to understand that will turn off almost any faith-based reader is what they would call blasphemy, right? Using the Lord's name in vain, or any. I should say, not just Christianity, any religion. If you're writing to a Muslim audience and you are slamming Muhammad or Allah, obviously that's not going to fly well for that particular readership. Okay, so you need to be careful there. You need to understand who your audience is. And then again, like in the last video, consider your genre. Certain genres like horror, I think like contemporary horror, kind of lends itself to more language. You're running from an axe murderer or some monster that was developed in a lagoon because radioactive ooze seeped in there, or whatever. People are probably going to be using more colorful language. I found that oftentimes in fantasy books, when I read a lot of language, it kind of turns me off. And one of the reasons is because a lot of fantasy is not urban fantasy, meaning set in our time. A lot of fantasy is kind of a medieval type setting. And, quite honestly, the swear words and the curses that they used at that time were very, very different than what we use today. So consider that. Mystery detective, again, it kind of just depends on, excuse me, it kind of depends on whether it's clean or not. The same with romance. I don't typically find a whole lot of language in romance. Now, I will admit I don't read a ton of romance. And then the other action, adventure, things like Tom Clancy, stuff like that. There's probably certain situations where it might make sense. Historical fiction, you got to understand what time period you're dealing with, and does that language make any sense? Okay. Obviously, if you're trying to reach a clean audience, then the answer is no. If you're writing erotica, again, anything goes. Most people, and this is not a knock against the erotica reading world out there, because I've read some really well-written erotica. I've also read some really poorly written erotica, but I've also read poorly written everything. Normally, people who are picking up an erotica book are pretty much okay with a lot. Okay, they're okay with language. They're okay with sex, obviously, things like that. So why put language? Why put swearing or cursing in your story? I think there's a couple really, and I know I'm sorry, it took like 8 minutes to get here, and it was probably way too long. But I think there's a couple really legitimate reasons to put swearing in your book. And number one, does it illustrate a person's character? Okay, and you can take that however you want. I'm not saying that someone has poor character because they swear. Lord knows I have a terrible potty mouth, okay? And I think I have pretty high character. Just who are they, right? Maybe they're a very aggressive person. They have a lot of anxiety. I have one character who is just, he was raised in the streets. And so his language is rough. And he doesn't know how to switch it off. Right? He's never been in polite company before. And so that's the language he uses all the time. And I think those situations, when they help advance the character, that makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of sense. Does it help advance the situation? Are we talking about a situation where people are afraid, they're in fear for their lives, people are dying, it's just crazy? Again, I think that's a situation that might warrant itself to have some colorful language, right? So I think, again, how does that swearing or cursing advance the story? What does it do for the story is the big question that you have to ask yourself. And my biggest thing is it in the nature of the character, right? Is it in the nature of the situation? And is it in the nature of the world in which you've created, both modern, contemporary, or otherwise, okay? So again, I don't know if these videos are helpful at all. I think if they at least get you thinking about something, maybe considering or reconsidering anything, and I am certainly not saying do or do not put swear words. I could care less what you do with your writing, as long as it's good, okay? But I think those are some things to consider, and I hope this helps. I hope this is intriguing. I hope it creates some thought. So yeah. So I'm gonna keep making them until someone tells me to stop. So as always, happy reading, fellow authors out there. Happy writing, and until next time, peace.